Okay, so we're going to turn our attention now back towards mostly the American context. Our next series of speakers are looking at how power is shifting and how people are working to shift power, partly through the lens of the 2012 election, and also beyond, through the new social movements that we've been seeing appear, in many cases, hyper-powered by social media and social networks. Our first speaker is an ideal person to sort of bring us into that because Gilad Lotan, Vice President at Social Flow, has made it his specialty to use all this flowing data that we are giving off as we tweet, as we share, as we blog, as we connect, to be able to visualize some patterns, the signal in all that noise. And so he's going to walk us through some of his most recent research on how we can actually map and understand networked power through visualization. Gilad Lotan.
Thank you, Micha. Hi, I'm Gilad. I'm a data scientist at a New York City startup called Social Flow, where I spend most of my time looking at data and trying to understand how information spreads. I want to start by mentioning a trend that I'm seeing that's quite worrying to me. These are two articles that were recently published on Mashable. The best and worst times to share on Facebook and Twitter, or this is what the Arab world uses Twitter and Facebook for. And my issue with them, or I take issue with the oversimplification of these articles and the way they misinform the public effectively. A lot of this data is many times it's badly sampled, right? And we have this notion that if it's based on data, then it must be right. Right? The data is an authority and it teaches us something, but we have to get better at asking where the data is coming from and what kind of sampling led to whatever the study is claiming it. So one of the things many of these studies don't take into account are the way that people organize around networks and the way that information spreads through networks. There's this myth that you simply put a good video online, it will spread, it will find its audience. But in fact, we all know that you need the right type of audience to be attentive at the right time for information to spread. It spreads through people, through networks of people. Right? And you cannot demand attention from someone, or you can't expect it at a certain point in time. What you need to do is start understanding your audience, your network, how and what they tend to give attention to in order to optimize the kind of content that you want to spread to the network. So regardless if you're a social movement or if you're a media outlet, we can start picking up all these pieces of content shared by interactions within social networks and make much better decisions. I mean, it's like looking left and right before crossing the street. By understanding what's going on before you jump in with your content, you can make much, much better decisions. So I want to start by asking a very simple question. I assume a lot of you use Twitter. Who follows The Economist? Raise your hand. All right. Now, keep your hand up if you also follow Justin Bieber. Yes, we have a few in the room. So you are not alone. Actually, there are over 123,000 people who follow both Justin Bieber and The Economist. And who are these people? They're actually, normal people like this person here. Or like Evan Therese Gonzalez, who's an economist and happens to love Justin Bieber. But we all have these different facets within our interests, different things that we're interested in. And that comes to play by the types of accounts that we follow. So once we start looking at data, we can actually start seeing these different patterns emerge. For example, here, this is a comparison of how a social movement looks like. So this is Marcha Anti-EPN that happened over the weekend that brought 90,000 people out to the streets across Mexico. That's the blue line, whereas True Blood screening over the weekend, we see a massive spike during the time of the actual TV show. And then there's the award ceremony, the Tony Awards, which is much more spiky, right? Every time an announcement is made, there's a spike. People get very excited. So we can start identifying these patterns through data and trying to understand what type of event this might be. We can also look at audiences and how they organize and the data that they create. This simple graph shows the activity of audiences. So in red, we see the Al Jazeera audience. In blue, we see Pepsi, and in green, the AP. And what you'll notice are the diurnal patterns, right? The daily ups and downs of these audiences, which suggest that a lot of them are in one geographic time zone. In this case, it's the United States. But what you'll also note is that Al Jazeera is much wider, meaning alluding to the fact that its audience is much more geographically dispersed, right? And notice the spikes that happen. One, the blue spike is a Pepsi promotion that happened, and then the spikes towards the right side of the chart are the announcement of Whitney Houston's death. So one thing we could start doing, we can look at the activity of these audiences, but we can start diving into the data and see what conversations are happening. And this is an illustration of a network graph of all the conversations that are happening within the Al Jazeera audience at a certain given point in time. So the core of the audience is talking about topics that we'd associate with Al Jazeera, like Middle East, the Egyptian uprising, etc. But there are parts of the graph that talk about different things, like, in this case, Fukushima and TEPCO. We can also start comparing these audiences. So this is a comparison of Al Jazeera's sort of focus of the audience versus the Fox News focus. Right? So we can generate this type of content in real time and start drawing these comparisons. We can also look at what people are clicking on. So not only what people are sort of publishing out, but actually what's driving traffic to these websites. And this is the first time we have access to this kind of content. Right? It's always been within locked doors within the media outlets. Now a lot of this data is made public. So it's not surprising that words such as world and economics drive a lot of the traffic to The Economist versus words like Casey Anthony and crime and murder that drive most of the traffic to Fox News, right? But now we can see it with data. So rule number one, my network is not your network, right? My network may be active at different times of day, may be interested in different things, may be engaged by different types of articles, right? The fact that my network is active at a certain time of day or respond to certain kind of content doesn't mean that your network will behave the same, right? Very important rule to understand when talking about the media, the network media landscape. Let's look at Kony 2012 for a bit. So people are obsessed with virality, right? With getting viral videos to spread, and Kony was one of the most viral videos we've ever witnessed, right? I think it was 100 million views within a few days, right? But what's behind Kony is actually an organized movement. It's not like the video was just placed online and spread magically. But what we could actually start seeing when we look at the data are all these dense networks that Invisible Children had pre-existing before the video was put online. Right? And when you actually map out the network of users that were associated with the movement and help push it at the very initial stage, at the very beginning, you actually see these dense clusters emerge from the data, from the relationships of the friendships of the people online within social networks. And you see these dense clusters appear at places like Birmingham, Alabama, like Oklahoma City, like Noblesville, Indiana. Right? It's all these youth that actually Invisible Children went to all these places and got these kids associated with the cause and with the movement. And it's not so. The thing is, what's really interesting about this data is it reveals these hidden structures that help make the video what it was. It's all these loosely connected points in the network that were activated all at once at the same time and helped make it much more trend than it would have been otherwise. And when you actually dive into a lot of these profiles and start analyzing the words from their profiles, you get words like God, Jesus, love life. Right? How would you have felt had you known this in context before you shared the video? I want to point out another example from a few months ago where media, again, misinformed and didn't note the effects of networks. So the following tweet was posted by Aja Dior 45 minutes before the formal announcement of Whitney Houston's death. And the big headline in media was, Twitter broke the news again and beat mainstream media to the news. But what they failed to understand that, yes, Aja Dior posted this note about the fact that Whitney Houston had died to her network, but it did not spread. And you could see her friends and the folks she was talking to at that moment, which is about 45 minutes before the major announcement, but there was no spread. Nothing leaked to the network. And when you actually start mapping out the wider network across the next few hours, you see that only when TMZ and the AP got the formal announcement did the information actually spread to the network. Were people actually informed? So you may have the hottest piece of information there, and it may be fed to the network, but that doesn't mean it'll spread. You still need the right type of network connected to you to get the information out there. So my news feed is constructed by the people I follow. Right? It gets a lot of Hebrew content very early in the morning, and then it probably becomes very similar to a lot of your feeds, tech-heavy and politics-heavy. But during the heat of the Occupy movement, my feed totally transformed. It was completely and utterly about Occupy. Right? And in my terms, when looking at my feed, that was all that was happening in the world. And we're starting to see all these people at that time claiming, they're probably experiencing the same thing. They're saying, oh, I'm seeing mostly content about Occupy in my network. Why is it not trending? Why has it not reached the trending topics list on Twitter? And they were actually accusing Twitter of censoring the topic. But once you look at the data, once we took a look at the larger sort of data set that was out there, the whole of the network, you could see that while Occupy, which is represented here in the blue line, was sort of slowly growing and sometimes spiking, it could never, ever compete with the major trends that were happening in the network, such as Kim Kardashian's wedding and Steve Jobs' death. Right? So it could never actually compete with the levels of spikes that they generated. And what was obvious is that the algorithm that calculated trending topics took into account mostly anything that massively spiked. So if you're novel content and if you're spiking, then you have a much higher likelihood to trend versus if you're any sort of movement or anything that's slowly accruing and growing. So we need to think better about this network algorithmic power, right? This power that's embedded within the systems that we use in our daily lives, these systems that govern what we give our attention to, right? They suggest content to us. They say, this is the hottest thing right now, based on your friends, based on the network, based on what we're seeing. But how is that calculated? Right? There's this perception that these algorithms are neutral because it's math, right? And math is not biased because it's a fact, it's math. But they actually have political values encoded within them. And we have to get better at understanding what that means and the implications of these within our network space. So in closing, I think we've it's been amazing to hear all the speakers yesterday and this morning. We're all agreeing that something different is happening here. Right? That social media is not a disruptor anymore. It's the status quo. It's here to stay, and we need to better understand it. So if there are 3 things I want you to take away from this talk, B1, when you see a generalization, it's typically misinforming. So just know how to ask better questions and understand what data it's based on. 2, it's incredibly important to understand information flows and the intersections within networks, as well as how this algorithmic curation is working within these networks. Right? Understanding that will give us true power. And 3rd, networks are not a meritocracy. Right? They're not equal. Nodes are not equal within the network. Thank you.